Fred the Mud Monster is back, skinnier than ever. Well,
Really?
relatively. I've lost like 25 pounds, 30 pounds. It's been good.
How'd you do it?
Honestly, just at first it was lots of biking and running, which then led to a foot problem, which I'm healing from.
Oh
I'm
man.
the Mud Monster is currently dealing with a bout of plantar fasciitis. And for those who might be wondering, isn't that an old person's problem? Teenagers get this. It just happened, and I was a little bit overweight, and it's the way the cookie crumbles. But then I changed what I was eating and when I ate, and all of a sudden I've been dropping pounds like crazy. Although I was dropping pounds like crazy before, but now I can jump around and I can do more activities. Although my foot always goes, maybe you should rest for a little bit.
Did you go and get steroid injections?
Oh no, I don't need that. It's really far along already. I'm only 2, 3 weeks from when the injury happened, and the pain is down by 80%. It's already close.
Yeah, as you know, I had that like 2 or 3 years ago, like right when we started our first podcast, right around the same time.
Right.
And we used to play ultimate frisbee together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had to drop out because it was just the pain was that intense. And, not so much during the game. It was usually the day afterwards when I just couldn't move the next day, and I needed to be able to move for work. So
Right.
what I ended up doing was going into a doctor and getting steroid injections into my foot, which I don't like going to the doctor. So for me to have done something like that, and what I really don't like is getting injections. So for me to have done that, I must have been in a lot of pain. And I really wanted to get back to ultimate frisbee. And I came back for a little while. And then it's like the second time around, I'm just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. It was too much. And then I moved away. So
Yeah. I mean, I'm lucky that for me, at the very least, because I've just been a log for the past 2.5 weeks, I've been taking the recommendations very seriously. I think it's the fact that I've not been on my feet that much that all of a sudden
mm,
the foot is healed quite fast because there's not pressure being put on it. So it just kind of goes, nothing to do except we work the feet. And plus, it's getting to the point now where before I would hobble around when I started. Now I can put my feet in a shoe and I have no issues, almost little pain. I was able to go through my day. But I'll
good.
get back to exercising again more seriously at some point. But for now, I don't want to ruin my progress and cast bad juju on it. So, taking my time. But in the meantime, though, it seems like in my athletic world, I've now taken a position of responsibility once again. So now I have more responsibilities. All of a sudden, I'm like, yeah. Even when I'm not doing sports, I suddenly am involved with sports. But speaking of sports, though, and I guess you could say we had this conversation a little bit earlier this week, just between the two of us, about talking to oneself.
Yeah. So the other day, somebody was looking at basically their security videos, closed circuit TV, and they were looking at something else, but then they saw me too. They said, Caesar, you came into the footage and you were doing something strange. And he's like, I want to show it to you. And I'm like, okay. I was worried it's going to be something like serious. But it was when I looked at it, it was just me swearing at myself, kind of like saying something to the point of, if you don't get moving, you're going to be late for what you need to do. And I'm like, oh, that's what you're concerned about? I swear at myself all the time. And that would seem like kind of a weird thing, kind of like, hey, Caesar's a little crazy, right? But I mean, when you're alone, you feel like you're alone, right? And you really don't have to play by society's rules. Like maybe you stumble upon somebody in the woods or something like, oh, sorry, I was talking to myself. You feel a little silly for a few seconds, but with closed circuit television, I guess anybody could watch you at any time. And it just kind of feels like security cameras are everywhere now.
Yes.
So it's like, do you have to constantly be thinking of what you're doing when you're alone?
It is strange. It is strange to think about it. I'm just so used to talking to myself in order to just get the ball rolling in my own mind, particularly in the world where I'm in, where it's now so much more academic driven than ever before. You need to have just sound in order to just start to have the thoughts going, oh, that's why I want to write for this argument. This is why I wanted to refute this scholar. I actually have been refuting scholars now, Caesar. I actually have to go in and be an asshole to pretty much every single author. I used to be so nice. Now I'm like, well, this needs work. That's not really the right interpretation. Well, actually, this is a fundamental flaw of the book. I just reviewed a book about gender in Nigeria, and I tore that thing apart. And I sat there and going, what have I become? I've become a real monster. Even my professor went, ooh, that's a great point, but that's a little bit mean. And people just said, I've never thought of it that way, because other people in this group, this class, have read this book before. It's one of these big classics in the Africa gender field, which is so funny because I'm like, this is not even my main specialty. Why am I here?
Okay, so what's kind of the cliff notes of what's the point of your studies?
Oh, yeah. The point is, for me, my main focus is on American history and focusing on the Great Migration. That's 6 million Black Americans moving up to the North during the span of like 4 decades. And in our studies, the important thing is that we have a major concentration and a minor concentration. The minor concentration is in Africa, and my major concentration is in African American. So this course that I'm taking is filling out my minor field. And this is one of the major courses, which is African gender in the minor field. And so that's kind of how I got thrown into this crazy little class. I love it, but at the same time, there are definitely moments where you have to talk yourself into it, like, come on, butthole, you gotta do this. You're gonna fail if you don't rip this book apart. And I go, okay, you're not talking to the author themselves. Just do it. So when you say get going, dummy, it's same for me. If it's not that, it's also just making decisions. If I'm thinking, oh, should I get the red wine or the white wine with the chicken? Or should I get, or as the great Rob Flames would say, either one doesn't matter, asshole, they're dead.
Well, it made me start thinking about how much I talk to myself, which is a lot, which is more than I ever realized. And one person pointed out that, you know what, when I'm in my car, I swear at people. And it's like, yeah, I think we all do that, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like, get out of the way, dummy. Why are you driving 35 and a 55? That kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a dash cam in my vehicle. So I go back and anytime something like really severe happens, it's like, oh, did I just do something wrong, or did they do something wrong? And I want to go back and look at it later. I'll go back, and every time I'm swearing, like, you stupid, and I'm like, oh, I don't really like myself when I'm doing that. I don't want to hear myself swearing, but nobody's hurt by it because I'm in the vehicle alone. It's not like the person in the other car hears me swearing at them, right?
Mm.
And it's the same when I'm alone. If I'm swearing at myself, that's cool too, right? Because I think I need to be sworn at sometimes. And I think a lot of people probably need to be sworn at sometimes. And they probably don't get their daily allotment of, what we do. We kind of like tell ourselves, you need to do better.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people are telling themselves that.
Well, it's a funny thing that there's a recent little, I guess you could say, one of these pseudoscience studies that came out that said that just over half or around half, it's around that range where people don't even have inner monologue in their head.
Oh, I think I heard this recently. Yeah.
And you just sit there and you go, wow, if it's just over half of people do not have an inner monologue, that's an example, right? It's something where people just kind of go through the day just effectively with a blank slate or blank thoughts or blank voice. And now all of a sudden, if you don't have just that inner voice in your head that just kind of goes, hey, dummy, that's not how you're supposed to do it. And you go, oh, right, you're right. It sounds insane, but it's like having that extra little, like, are you sure this is the right way to do it? And it just helps. It just helps with making all the right decisions and making decisions that won't be too costly. I mean, it certainly helped me throughout my life to have moments where I go, hey, dummy, you're not supposed to do it that way. You're not supposed to get on the top part of the ladder. Each time I go, but I could do it. It's like, no, you shouldn't do it. You'll fall. And then each time I'm proven right. The inner thought's been proven right. I just go, it's about the inner intuition, man.
So somebody who doesn't have that inner monologue, they would probably be like, what the heck is that crazy person doing?
Yeah.
But I think we're better off because we are swearing at ourselves. Because we do have that.
I think there was another study or a couple of other studies that have shown that those who do have that inner dialogue are more likely to make to be a little more hesitant when making decisions, but make wiser decisions. Not
Mm.
that those who don't do the inner monologue are somehow just making rash decisions, but there's a greater chance of making the stronger decision because it's more deliberation, which is just so important.
But you were talking about how some people don't have inner monologue and some people do. And it kind of in a rough way kind of brings us to the subject that we're talking about today. Creation versus consumption, especially in regards to sports, which you and I are both huge sports fans, right?
Absolutely.
How much is it healthy to consume more content than you create, or to rely on other people's entertainments more than we rely on the things that we do ourselves, that we are excited about doing, that we're maybe it's not even like an artistic creation, but more of like okay, I'm a doctor and I'm going to save lives all day. And then I'm going to go home at the end of the day and I'm going to watch Netflix for 2 hours.
I just think that that answer kind of is always so tricky. It depends on, I think, the preferences of the person. It really does vary. I'm giving the grad school answer, which means it's all about nuance. It's all about perspective. You don't know until you're in that person's shoes. But it is kind of the serious answer because some people, they're totally fine with the lack of self-creation. And that's something that comes down to personality preferences and how someone just feels about just the way that the world kind of works. If they're totally fine with just being a reactive person, doing reactionary things, and then going at the end of the day and continuing to consume that content around them, then that's what works. But for some, the idea of being in that reactive box where you're constantly reacting to things is not so great. It's not great per se when you're constantly on call and someone goes, well, you have to go here, go there, do this little task. Some people that makes them lose their minds. Therefore, those people want to be more proactive. And when you're more proactive, you're just able to just feel a little more alive for some of those people who just don't like to be put in a box. And with sports, it's kind of strangely enough, that's kind of similar. You think about how some people they just want to consume the game, they want to sit back and maybe knock a couple beers, and they enjoy the same sport every single year, every single Sunday. For me, as Fred the Mud Monster is more than just enjoy sports that involve mud. He also enjoys different sports of different types. I just don't like the idea of being put into one little space, one little box of sports enjoyment. While I'm a huge fan of American football, that's not by far not the only sport I look and watch and consume. I know that for me, I watch professional ultimate frisbee. I have to admit, but it is kind of cool to see what people do. But I watch cricket sometimes, and people go, "Cricket, cricket. That's a worse version of baseball." Don't let anyone from India Pakistan hear that, though. They might start a whole debate over that.
Okay, so how much sports would you say that you consume on a weekly basis, like as far as hours or minutes go?
Believe it or not, the consumption of the sports is actually not ginormous because I don't really watch live sports anymore. It just gives me too much little anxiety. I get too involved. And so for me, it's just like, it's not worth it. It's not worth my health. So therefore, I really just check score lines and then I look at some of the highlights. But I'd say that it's probably 2 hours a week,
Mm.
2 to 3. Just being honest, because then I also do fantasy football,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that does take a little more time, but only a little bit more. And the weird thing is that sometimes it feels like I'm spending hours on it, but that's because I'm doing something else at the same time and I'm not really
Right.
paying attention. I'm passively consuming it. And at that point, you wonder, like, well, I'm not really doing much of anything. It's just background noise or something of that nature. Sometimes I read little sports debates, and that technically is part of the consumption too, but it's only for a brief moment because most of the time I think sports debates are, well, highly, what's the word? What's the word that's not going to be mean? Dumb.
Trivial, trivial, contrived.
No, dumb. Dumb
Oh.
works. It rather is remarkable. People go, LeBron the GOAT, Jordan the GOAT, and they pull up the same statistics every time. We go, aren't you guys just bored? It's the same
Right.
thing. I literally can go, this person will say this person will say that, and they go, well, this statistic says, I'm like, wow, I'm getting pretty.
Like, how many times do we need to hear, is Michael Jordan the greatest of all time? Right? Like, we've heard, how many times have we heard that argument?
Uh, thousands, and tens of thousands in different spaces and avenues. They're having this new debate now on the, well, formerly Twitter, X, about the greatest college player of all time, basketball. And people, again, put Jordan up there as number one, but then people made this point of it. Well, actually, that's not even close. Kareem is a multi-time champion, multi-time top level player in the Final Four, was, dominant in different positions. They had to outlaw dunking because he was just too good at it for a period of time. And you just go, well, that is dominance. But people go and say, well, but Jordan was still dominant in this position. But it shows you, though, that a lot of people are saying that people think that Jordan was the greatest in college basketball because of what he did in the NBA. But in reality, the numbers would reflect something else, that Kareem is the more dominant college athlete than the professional realm. Totally different argument. And then people got into the whole like, well, it was that Jordan was being held back by Dean Smith. And you go, this is all headcanon. We're all creating fan fiction here. Let's just look at the objective truth of, yes, Michael Jordan was on this fantastic team. But then you think about more and more and you go, why am I thinking about this? Why am I spending time dwelling my mind upon this situation? And I thought about this many times in my life. Like, why do I think about these sports things? And reason number one was the fact that I realized that it's because my family's based in New York and Boston. And those are two very sports defined areas.
All right.
That,
well, I'm from Ohio, and we both lived there at the same time. And that is the cradle of NFL football. That's where the Pro Football Hall of Fame is. Like, if you grew up in Ohio, you lived around sports your entire life.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's similar for Baltimore too. It's just a little bit different. We're so used to just consuming sports because that's what we have. It's a way to distract us from, oh, hey, another 5 shootings today in the city. I remember just hearing that on the news all the time. Another person shot, another person shot. It was so matter of fact, you just forget. In reality, you're supposed to be horrified, but sports help with that. Our sports teams were all good. We just were distracted. It was a way to just keep the serotonin going.
Well, until sports injects politics into their games, which happened a lot in recent years, especially in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
And you might say that their message was good or bad, or it might be irrelevant because, like you were saying, sports is supposed to be an escape from politics. Like, if I wanted to go watch politics, I know where to go watch politics. And I do it all the time. I listen to opinions that are close to mine, and I listen to opposite opinions, and I really don't need sports to interject because I've already heard it before it gets into sports, if that makes sense. I'm going to watch sports because it is an escape.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Who was in an academic program where politics are a constant discussion. Even I just go, oh, I just don't want to hear it in the sports context that much. Although it sometimes is quite interesting and needed in certain situations, but most of the time I just go, look, I appreciate what Colin Kaepernick did, but do I really need to know about the letter he sent to the New York Jets and the NFL? I just go, look, most people might say, one, we're not going to hire you because of the whole kneeling thing. But number two, you haven't been in the NFL for 7, 8 years. It's just a matter of reality that most teams will go, why should we sign you? You've not been in the NFL for almost a decade. You're going to be too rusty.
I would take it a step further. It's not that I dislike his message. I'm actually pretty ambivalent to the message.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of conservative people would say, I'm not watching football because he's kneeling on the side of on the field. That's not how I feel at all. I could care less if he's kneeling on the side of the field. I just don't want to talk about it. I just don't want to. Yeah. Like, I tuned in for the game. I didn't tune in for the politics.
No, for sure. And I think it's interesting because going back to the whole passive versus this kind of creation debate, I think in part people intertwine these things because people kind of get a little bit bored of the same old script and story. Like we may not want to admit it, but when your team is not so great, or maybe your team has just got the similar playing style, all of a sudden there's little bubblings of like, oh, look at this personality of this player. You add more dimensions to the sports entertainment in order to make it more interesting to the average viewer. Eventually, the viewer themselves starts to add more crazy things. They start to add beer. They start to add alcohol. They start to do things like, well, let's eat refried beans in a 7-layered bean paste. It's because this is adding additional stimulus to something that is by itself quite entertaining. But after the 50th, 60th time, if you're doing nothing else, you go, well, now I'm kind of just don't know what to do. I'm twiddling my thumbs, right?
I mean, we could
stimuli.
We could, wait to see what Taylor Swift is wearing in the booth.
But that's so funny. That's why, the NFL with the whole, I mean, you've seen it with the whole, the whole game between the Jets and the Chiefs, right? And
yeah, so this will probably come out in a month from now. So let's try to keep that in mind. But basically, Taylor Swift has started dating Travis Kelce, the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? The super famous Taylor Swift. And in some circles, she's probably bigger than the NFL. Like, she's had this extraordinary popularity, which kind of exploded out of nowhere this year. Have you noticed that? Like, she's filling stadiums one after another after another.
Well, it's the fact that now it's more the fact that the average Joe is recognizing Taylor Swift. I know that for me, when I was in undergrad, Taylor Swift was all the rage. But in the college environment, we had young college women, and then, of course, young college men who would consume Taylor Swift, and they go, oh, I want to see the concert. I'm a Swiftie. And that's when she switched to pop. And it's interesting that we go to this whole debate again because people got bored of her country style. And all of a sudden you go, now you spice it up, you create something new. And now you get into this whole pop angle. And now again, people go, well, the Taylor Swift thing's really cool with the pop, but it's getting kind of repetitive, even though people love it. And all of a sudden, it's a slight twist in terms of now you add a little bit extra spice by dating an athlete. And now all of a sudden, there's a new dimension that people get interested in. Then you draw new fans, new ways to entertain people. Now you have the Swifties now getting into football and people asking questions like, what's a first down? And you sit there and you go, this is kind of the way that creationism works, or creationism, that's really but this is how the creation versus, I guess you could say, stagnancy works. And we don't even realize that we do this every single time that something gets a little bit boring, whether it's on our end or someone else's end. We create a new stimuli to add on top of it. And all of a sudden, you get this convoluted, massive blob that you don't really know what it is anymore. Look at the fact that in the NFL Instagram bio, it said 2-0 for the Swifties or something like that, right? And you just sit there and you go, it's different from regular bio. Because now people would say, well, the old bio was neat, and, talk about the NFL, National Football League, but it's boring. So all of a sudden you change it up in order to add more stimulus, in order to make it more interesting. And all of a sudden you get 2-0 Swifties and people go, they're talking about it. It's this funny way of constantly creating new material in order to engage, and re-engage in this kind of same old material. It's still about football, but now there's that additional dimension of the Swifties and the Swiftie layer. But in that creation of new layers, I feel like that there's too much. There's too much stimuli now. And now people don't know where to really point their attention. And you get all these weird discussions and people just kind of talk about weird things and body posture. And people talk about the locker room. It's like, hey, man, I'm here to look at the score. I'm here to look at the teams perform. Locker room stuff and trades, you could deal with that later. Like, I hated it when there was this drama about Lamar Jackson. And people say, oh, he's going to get traded, blah, blah, blah. And you see all these Photoshop jerseys. It's constant creation of new stimuli to entertain ourselves. But in reality, this was an issue about money. I'm like, look, the Ravens organization is probably just going to make the payment. They're just being a little bit stubborn. And what happened? They made the payment. It just took a little bit.
I don't think anybody actually believed that he was going anywhere, right? That the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens was going to be traded to somebody else because he was such an important part of the team. And I get that there's like anger and there's hurt feelings and all that stuff over those things, but let's not dig too deep into this. But basically, his frustrations was with a decision that the other team, the Cleveland Browns, made like a really, really bad decision. And he was expecting the Baltimore Ravens to make the same bad decision that the Cleveland Browns made. And basically every other owner in the entire NFL was like, no, we're not doing this.
It's like that breaking point, but then eventually the Ravens did kind of cave in. And now the funny thing is, with all these new contracts, only really a couple quarterbacks have really kind of kept up the end of the bargain, which is Lamar, Jalen Hurts. But then you look at Jones, Burrow, Watson, they have not held up their contract.
No. It's almost like they got their contract and then they just like
they just kind of dipped out. It's interesting, and now you get this new problem of people get so obsessed with their teams trying to win, and it dictates their day, right? And then all of a sudden you get players who just aren't as motivated anymore. And then all of a sudden the team stinks. I mean, you look at the Bengals fan bases in tatters. And it's you sit there and you go, in those moments when a fan base starts to just becomes exasperated by this or gets too frustrated, I think it serves as a reminder of, should we really be this consumed by the sports around us to this degree where it's affecting our day, it's affecting our week? I think, whenever I see some of my teams lose, I feel bad for like a minute and then I move on with my day. And I think it's been such a change. I'm not letting it dictate the mood.
So here's my thought. Like when I was younger, okay, so let's say I was 16 or 15 or whatever, and I watched sports. Like all these people were older than me. So they were almost kind of like people to look up to in a way. And then I got past college age and I'm like, oh, these people are younger than me. And then at some point I got to the point where it's like, oh, most of the NFL players are younger than me. I think they all are at this point, right? And it's like, oh, so I'm finding my entertainment in people who are younger and less wise than I am. And great, of course, they're like 10 times, 20 times, 30 times the athlete I'll ever be. But why am I sourcing my enjoyment out to somebody who may have gotten broken up with their girlfriend and their college girlfriend last night? Like that's something that they never talk about in sports. They talk about the money, they talk about the injuries, they talk about this, they talk about that, but you don't know what they went through over the last week, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe that guy's girlfriend broke up with him last night and that's why he's having a bad game. And we would never know it.
But instead we just go, well, this guy's a bum. He sucks.
Yeah. It's like, why is he having such a bad week this week? But we have no idea what's going on in these people's lives. I don't really want to know what's going on in their lives. I just want them to show up on Sunday and play well, right?
Right. That's the same stance I have. I just want them to play well and then their personal lives or whatever they want to do. But then we got, as the media and I guess you say people in general got a little bit too interested. It's like, oh, what else are you doing? It's because it's constantly craving for more entertainment, more stimulus. And that comes with a big problem of then people get used to it. And all of a sudden it leads to this problem of people are now so relying on this constant stimuli that they're not creating for themselves, that then when it goes bad, when the stimuli goes into a more negative aspect, then they all of a sudden turn very vile. It starts to get like pretty crazy. And you just go, isn't that crazy? Like when people start fights, for example, in sports stadiums, because their team's losing, they're drunk, they're angry. I saw this recently. A Raiders and Chargers fan was duking out with one another. And you just see and you go, why? These two people have never met each other if they didn't go to the same game. And not for the fact that the Raiders team was losing and the Chargers team was winning, the Chargers player was like, oh, Chargers fan was going, oh, look at us, we're number one. And all of a sudden, the Raiders fan gets angry and they start a fight and someone's head hits the concrete and you go, this is completely ridiculous. There's nothing gained, at least with maybe some old fighting back in the ancient times before history. You fight over the coconut. You get the coconut. Maybe the person next to you dies, but you got the coconut. You get to eat for a day. But there's nothing here. All you have is a bunch of beer and people going, oh, boo. There's nothing. There's nothing that comes out of these fights. And it shows that in some ways that the entertainment value is so shallow. It doesn't profoundly fulfill that human need for us. It only fills in the space for that Sunday or for that week.
Well, let's talk about sports injuries and the way that the rules have changed over time. When I was a kid, like one of the biggest plays I ever watched was when Steve Atwater went head on, like I took a head on collision with Christian Okoye, the Kansas City Chiefs
Very
running back,
nightmare. Yeah.
and the Nigerian Nightmare, and they went head on with each other and slammed each other right in each other's noggins, and it was considered one of the greatest plays in sports of all time. But if you did that today, that would be considered a 15-yard penalty. Steve Atwater probably would have been kicked out of the game, and the Chiefs would have gone on to win the game.
Right.
Probably because of penalties. And that's another thing that's driving me insane right now is that the NFL has just become constantly inundated with all these penalties, and some of them are right and some of them are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want the game to be ended in a penalty. I'm investing 3 hours into a game.
Right.
I don't want it to end with the referees doing something, whether they're right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's a no-win situation, I think, because for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, they make the right call. I mean, that's probably the best scenario, right? They make the right call and everybody knows it, but still the game was decided by a call.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a couple of other options. They made the wrong call, which you just invested 3 hours into something that ended in a referee making the wrong call.
Right.
And sometimes they'll come out on Monday morning and they'll admit it. The NFL will come out and be like, yep, we screwed up.
Yeah, it's tough. But I think it shows you, though, that when you look at the beyond the value of just getting entertained for 3 hours, you go, man, spending 3 hours just to feel just sad and a little bit frustrated at the end. It's like you just go, why am I here? Right. And I think for me, that when I had that moment, I remember there was the AFC title game between the Ravens and the Patriots from 2011. And for those who might be too young, that's for, which is wild to say, but that is a game where if the Ravens would have won, they would have gone on to take on the Giants for the Super Bowl. And Eli Manning probably would have gotten a second ring anyway, but I would like to think what if. But that game was so frustrating. I was so upset. And I remember this, I was still a minor at the time. And I remember my mother just went up, was like, you gotta this is just a game, honey. You got it. There's nothing that's added to it. It's just entertainment on a Sunday. And it kind of the light bulb went off in my mind. Now it's taken me a long time to get to that point where I'm comfortable with, I don't need to see the game. I'm good. But when I don't see the game, I'm in firm control of my sports entertainment. And it allows me to be kind of like, oh, that's really interesting. Or, oh, I didn't know that was a highlight. Oh, good on that player for making that play. And now I'm just in a place where I can now happily consume sports without feeling too like frustrated, and I could just enjoy just the camaraderie and enjoy some of the I guess you could say some of the trolling that comes with discussing it with friends, and just it's a better, I feel like I'm more proactive in creating my own form of entertainment. Even though I'm still looking at a scoreline, I feel like I'm creating it in my own special way, which is kind of different than just staring at the TV. But that's just me.
But to be a fan of sports, you have to be living vicariously through somebody else.
That is true. I feel like that is a good point. Yeah.
Which is very weird.
It is strange, isn't it? I think that most people would consider me a very casual fan, which is true. I mean, I look at the score, but the funny thing is, though, that for me at least, I may be casual, but I know the names better. I know the different. I remember I went to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and here I am, this person who's barely watched a live game in years, and I'm rattling off these names from the Hall of Fame from like 1940, the great Bronco Nagurski. And people might go, who's that? Old person, very old. He's long dead, but very famous fullback. And yes, fullbacks used to be very prominent back in the day in the 1930s. That's when he played. He played in the 30s, I think, 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And some of the older football fans there, they went, wow, I didn't think a young person would know about Bronco Nagurski. And I'm glad off the names like Y.A. Tittle, hey, diddle, diddle, Y.A. No. It's hard to remember, but it's, I'm trying to remember the whole phrase. But, like the alley-oop to, R.C. Owens, I think is the name of the receiver. And all these different players are well before my time. It's interesting to hear casual, but I think that if someone controls their own sports entertainment and doesn't get dictated by living vicariously through that consumption of like the television, and can kind of be able to make more active choices, then I think you're able to be a healthier sports fan that really sees the beauty of sports, but also gets to be a little bit of a sports nerd, which, given what I do in my life, it only makes sense that being a nerd is the fun part of being a sports fan, not even the consumption of it.
Well, let's go back to the third option. We were talking about how the referees make decisions, right? There's one, they make the right play, or two, they make the wrong call, right?
Yeah.
The right call versus the wrong call. And then there's like a third option. A player gets injured under that whole Steve Atwater, Christian Okoye scenario, right, where it's a helmet to helmet contact. Okay, so we're in different cities, so we probably watch different games. But on the first game of the year, the Broncos played the Raiders, and it was a very close game. And the Broncos stopped the Raiders short of like on third down, probably, or fourth down, something like that. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. But they basically ended the drive. The Broncos ended the drive, and the Raiders couldn't go any further, except that a Broncos defender led with his helmet,
right,
which extended the game, which basically was the end of the game. And so the Raiders won, right? And my first reaction to that call was, what a bunch of crap. Again, I just watched a 3-hour game and it ended in a referee call.
And that sucks, right? Yeah.
And it ended in a referee call that would have been legal 20 years ago, but it's not today. It would have been considered a great play 20 years ago, but it's not today. And I was furious because football should be more like it is when I was young, right? But then, I saw the Raiders player try to get up, and he just looked kind of like drowsy and like he was on another planet, right?
Right.
And I'm like, oh, okay, this is what we see, like when people at the end of their careers are crazy because they've had so many hits to the head. And it's like, okay, I kind of get it. And I remember maybe 10 years ago or so, Colin Cowherd used to make these recommendations, or not recommendations, but he always has these theories, right? And he's like, we're not barbarians. This isn't the Roman Colosseum. We aren't there to watch people die. We are no longer barbarians, and we cannot root for people anymore. Like, we've risen above this existential level where we're not supposed to root for people to be murdered in front of us. And we literally saw that happen last year.
Right. Yeah. Almost with the Damar Hamlin situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really wasn't like a foul play or anything, but we watched somebody die in front of our eyes. It was on a primetime game, so we all saw it happen in real time.
Right, exactly.
And it's just like it went from, oh, I'm watching sports to, oh my gosh, I just watched a dude die.
Right. And that's kind of like that moment where it is effectively gladiatorial sports. It is. The arenas, the shape, and the whole environment, people getting pumped up, and even the helmets are kind of remind me, at least because of course the inner historian comes out, it reminds me.
Oh, no. As an inner historian, tell me a little bit about some of the Roman Colosseum days.
Okay, so interestingly enough, so much of the shape of the football stadium goes back to the shape of the Colosseum itself. And the funny thing is that the Colosseum was not the first of its type. And there were other ones before the Colosseum was made. It's just that now Rome wanted this big stadium in its capital, because gladiatorial games have been existing well before the Colosseum was even created. But now, like, well, we want this big venue. And it's kind of funny, with so many Western societies emulating the Roman Empire and its culture, it's no wonder all of a sudden we started to include these massive stadiums that would only allow for some of the biggest sports to occur, whether it's American football or it's soccer, or as maybe some of the more purists may call it, actual football. But
what would some of the things that they would watch inside the Roman Colosseum? What would those things be?
Oh, let's see. We can begin with ship battles. They had mock ship battles. I'm not even joking. They'd flood the stadium and the ships would ram into each other.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that sounds
very
fun.
dangerous.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
You allow the Romans had to kind of like stand back. You might get in the splash zone. Like, what splash zone? Oh. These ships are really going at each other. People often died. Really? And then, of course, if you didn't do water, I got to change that phrase. I was about to say something very, very naughty by accident. If you weren't going to do water sports, then you could see someone getting executed by a lion in the middle of in the morning and in the middle of the afternoon. Someone get charged with a crime, they get eaten alive. Sometimes even people who were accused of being a Christian at the time would be killed right there in that Coliseum. And then right around the lunchtime, you get some big group brawls. Yeah, have you ever seen like those big school fights on like YouTube and Twitter?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was that, except with swords and people who are more than willing to kill each other. So it was a little bit of a big free for all. And then you get into the evening where you get the personal one-on-ones. These gladiators will fight each other one-on-one. These were the big names. So this is kind of like LeBron James going up against Michael Jordan, except LeBron James has a trident and Michael Jordan has a short gladius blade. And both of them are, probably fed ridiculous amounts of alcohol in order for them to not feel the pain. And then after that matchup would then be something like,
Would one of them die?
sometimes they often
Hmm.
would, but
Oh.
often they also didn't die. It depends
Oh,
on
it was like cut out, like in MMA, where you can just be like, okay, I'm out, tap out.
kind of. It depends on how the crowd feels. Does the crowd go live, 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 or does the crowd go die, die, die? And sometimes the emperor would go or eh.
I think I
So
watched that movie with Joaquin Phoenix.
yes,
What was that movie called?
there's a thumbs up and thumbs down. That
Yeah,
was a thing.
what
Who
was that
knew?
movie called? Do you remember?
Gladiator. It would be Gladiator, right?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah,
Those were things that happened. And so that was kind of the main thing you would see. And if it wasn't LeBron James versus Michael Jordan, you get Kurt Angle versus The Undertaker. These are
yeah,
all huge names. These are like the big names. These are all prime, big athletes, theatrical. And you look at the history, and it branches off in so many other sports. Football with the way that the helmets are shaped. Very similar to some of the gladiator helmets and like kind of how they were kind of had lots of face mask and lots of protection. Obviously, it's vastly different because it's ancient Rome compared to the modern day, but they didn't have plastic. but but then even beyond that, though, you go into wrestling, the whole theatrical introductions, and I'm going to take you down. The guys who do that, except it would be more like I'm going to take you down and get the money. Gladiator would go, I'm going to capture you for the sake of this god, and then I'm going to put your head on a pike. And then, of course, the Roman Emperor go, well, maybe not a head on a pike. That's a little bit too graphic per se. But but these were people fighting for their lives. You're witnessing live murder.
yeah,
Sometimes they would die, and sometimes they wouldn't. Gladiators didn't often get paid that much, and some never got paid. Football players get paid, but they still get into it's live murder. You're seeing someone's brain get destroyed each time they clash heads. I mean, Shannon Sharp put it best playing in a football game, he said, run your head full force into your garage door 60 times a day on a Sunday. That's football.
yeah,
And you think about it, you go, oh my God, that is so painful. And no wonder it's murder. But again, though, because people get paid millions, though, people go, well, is it really that bad? And don't get me wrong, for those who consume the sport, it doesn't make someone evil.
Let me go back into, I don't know, 1800s, Fred.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they used to have like hangings, public hangings, right? Where people
Yeah,
would, everybody would show up and watch the guy die.
right.
And then let's go back even further. What would the Roman Colosseum days be? What year?
The 70s,
The,
80s.
the 1970s?
Minus 1900 years, but yeah.
Okay. So like actual 70s. The
Yes,
zero,
actual 70s.
0070.
Yes.
It was a different time back then.
Yes.
Could you imagine a former version of yourself wanting to watch somebody die on a battlefield or at a public hanging?
Well, I mean, currently, no, but to be honest, though, think about the fact what's entertainment at the time. I think we think that we are better moral creatures, but we have to put ourselves in the shoes of that context. And I don't have football to watch in the Roman Coliseum. I am someone who's probably working as a laborer in a very bad situation with not much money. I need to get my frustrations out. And so, what better way than to see a Roman Coliseum fight, than to see people get skinned alive by a lion and then see two people go at it with different little fish, with capturing each other with little fish nets and tridents. It's perfect. It gets my frustrations out. I yell at the gladiator, like, kill him, kill him. I mean, they did that. And it's just, you wonder, it's just, at the time, I could see how in that situation, because of the options available, I could do that. But of course, the me now would say absolutely not. It's morally reprehensible. But again, I think about it and I go, well, football is just kind of more evolved version of it. Yes, as people don't literally die, but look at Chandler Jones. That man has lost his marbles, completely lost his marbles. Poor guy. It's because his brain's been destroyed over
Wait,
the
which
duration of a career.
what's the guy's name again?
Chandler Jones.
Chandler Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Who's he play for? The
He played
Cardinals?
for the Raiders. He
Oh, the
just got
Raiders. Oh, right. And he's crazy, and they're making him like go through mental things, right? Like
yeah.
they sent him to an ER or something like
Well,
that.
they tried to, and then he didn't want to go, and then he's like making these accusations, like he threw a pedophilia accusation against one of the Raiders coaches, I think, or something like kind of along those lines, molestation,
Wow.
and uh, and you just sit
I haven't dug deep into that, so this is the first time I've heard the details.
yeah, and it's like, and you just sit there and you go, while the Chandler Jones didn't die on the football field and didn't have a near death experience like DeMar Hamlin did, but understand that over time you're seeing the slow murder of someone. It's like someone being stabbed once every year, but very slowly. But you got to do it every year, so you get stabbed in the same spot, and you can't really heal it. So you get infections. Your health starts to rapidly decline. The long-term impact is dramatic, and that's what you're seeing. Is that it doesn't feel like it's deadly, but it actually is. Over time, it builds up, and all of a sudden, someone is slowly decaying and dying.
Yeah. You may not be old enough to remember this, but when I was maybe a teenager, I can't remember exactly how old I was, but my brother-in-law, who was maybe like 8 years older than me, loved to watch MMA, the UFC, like UFC 1. Like he was like, let's watch UFC.
Wow.
Yeah, he was like, let's
Yeah.
watch UFC 1, which in hindsight, I could care less about it because I'm not into MMA, especially at the time I wasn't at all. But in hindsight, I'm glad I watched it because it's like, hey, cool, I watched the first ever,
No. Look at you. You're a pioneer.
UFC 1. But back then, they broke each other's arms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that probably lasted for maybe 2 or 3 years. And then they just kind of cut it out. It's like, you can't do that anymore. It's too gruesome, right? People don't want to watch this.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the XFL. I don't know. Like there's the XFL now, and apparently they've merged with the USFL, and nobody really cares really about either of them. But the original XFL was fantastic, like theoretically, because it was supposed. It was at a time when the NFL was kind of going in a soft direction, and the XFL was like, nope, we're gonna go back to old school, like back to the ancient tribes, back to Roman times, and we're going to destroy each other. And that didn't last long either, because I remember watching this like very specific play where a guy got really injured and somebody came up right in his face with the camera and was just like, they wanted to see like what his pain was like 2 or 3 feet away from his face. And the players around him were like, no, get out of here. Mm-hmm. I honestly felt like that was the moment when the XFL died, because they were no longer what they claim to be anymore. You can't be that extreme.
No, you cannot.
In modern times, because everybody thinks you're barbaric.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to see barbarism.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the term, maybe it's because I'm always now become so cynical these days. I think what people look for is controlled barbarism. It's the barbarism that exists within the societal context and is allowed. So when someone does a Steve Atwater hit and people go, wow, that was an amazing play, which it was a grand flag play, but it is a controlled barbarism. It's this moment where someone's just colliding their head and shoulder into another human being. But when you get to the XFL, though, when the standards have changed, now people go, well, we should care more about the players a little bit more. And so when you see that moment of human vulnerability getting exploited, that's like, oh, that's too barbaric. But then if someone gets demolished by Ray Lewis, people go, oh, greatest play I've ever seen.
and so let me go back to that first game of the year, Denver versus the Raiders, where the Broncos player ran up and made the play that he needed to play to make his team win. Mm-hmm. But the Raiders player got injured because of it.
Right.
And he lost his marbles. And the sportscasters who were doing the game, they were like, well, he needs to just let up so that doesn't happen. And it's like, no, that's not the way it works. Because if he doesn't go in there head first, the guy gets the first down.
Right.
So I think this adds this other layer to sports. It's like, what do we want? Do we want our team to win, or do we want people not to get injured?
Right, exactly. So what's that fine line? And I think that's why football's so tricky, because it requires so much force. These are huge men. These are not, if you've ever seen an NFL player in person, these people are sculpted like a dinosaur of marble. These guys are huge. And so how are you going to go, how am I going to just gently tap into someone and to prevent them getting the first down? Like, can you imagine Fred the Bud Monster even handling Derrick Henry? I'm a big guy, and Derrick Henry would eat me for lunch.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had the same experience that I do, where we both used to play ultimate frisbee. I played it a lot. I don't know if you still do, but every once in a while I'd play against somebody who was like, there is nothing that I can do against this dude to stop him.
Yeah.
And it was baffling to think that there is this much of a difference between talent between this guy and me, that I can't do anything to stop him. But then I think about how that guy probably wouldn't even be a very good college receiver. You know what I mean? Like in football.
Exactly.
And then that guy probably wouldn't be a very good, like the great college receiver may not be that great in the NFL. So that's how much difference there is between physical skill between me and somebody like who could even possibly make it to the NFL. The difference between talent, physical and like mental talent is baffling to me.
I think it shows you though that now you're talking about this big difference. Now you're talking about a bunch of people who are at that level, and you expect them to somehow be able to just simply gently tap someone to prevent that first down. That's hard. You're talking about men who are built to go, I'm here to stop you before point A to point B. Because if you get to point B, I lose my job. I get kicked out of the NFL because the coach goes, you didn't make the right play. So all of a sudden, you kind of take the risk and you go, I might hit the guy in the head with the head, but if I prevent that first down and then if ref doesn't throw that flag, then we can get off the field. You take those risks. And I know players are not purposefully trying to hit them unless you're Vontaze Burfict. But at the same time, though, like I get that the sports announcers are trying to make the appeal to the public and go, well, this was the wrong play. But in that moment, how can you be sure? I know that I play Ultimate quite a bit these days. And while I've gotten to the point now in my life where I'm so confident in my play, I just go, if someone is better than me, I know I can still make plays to stop them. And I do annoy many players. Like, I actually have to cut harder against you. I'm like, yep, the Mud Monster is has laid his mud tracks everywhere. You're going nowhere. But again, it's one of those things where even for me, since I'm like a person who's NFL-ish size, I'm not bulky as they are, but I'm a big person. I have muscles and everything else, and fat and everything else. To control that type of body that's north of 250 pounds is hard because you're running full force, and if you can run fast, that momentum, how do you control that and then jump and maneuver around so that way you don't collide with someone? I've had a couple of unfortunate moments where luckily no one's been too injured or just badly injured, but you make a collision and it looks bad. And I think in Ultimate, it's hard to control your body. Now imagine you're in a sport where you can do that full force without having to worry. It's about making that physical play. And now you're trying to unleash that inner animal to make sure that you can just get that just enough testosterone to force someone down before the play ends. That's so hard to do. Your mind's focused on just one thing: ball, ball, ball. And it's so hard. Like everyone teaches safety, but in order to teach that safety, you would have to have a sport that's in turn less testosterone driven, which then kind of leads to this whole issue of NFL versus the no fun league, right?
You're right. That was the thing in like the 90s, the no fun league. It's like, I remember when the NFL tried to crack down on in zone celebrations, right? And it's kind of gone back and forth. But there was a time when it was really fun, and then they cracked on it completely, and there was never a celebration in the end zone for like probably like 5 years. It was ridiculous. It was so boring. It's like, this is entertainment. We want to be entertained. We want to watch the guys have fun. So there were times, again, back to my youth, when I was younger, there were times where I would just watch NFL football from like 1 p.m. Eastern time when it started until the time I went to bed on Sunday night. And I don't think that's very healthy in hindsight, right?
No. Not at all.
And I think one thing that's been helping me in recent months is that I moved to mountain time, right? And so the games start like, you know what, the Jacksonville Jaguars were playing at 9:30 Eastern time, like because they were playing in London. That starts at 7:30 a.m. Mountain time.
Oh, I'd never not get enough of that.
I am not watching that game. So in theory, that old version of me could have watched television from 9:30 a.m. Eastern time until the time I went to bed. That guy who just loved consuming sports that much, you know. Mm-hmm. But one thing I found is because, I'm a Broncos fan, and surprisingly, my game started at like 11 a.m. Eastern time or 11 a.m. Mountain time. I get confused by all this. So I just push record on the DVR and I watch it when I come home. And dude, I can get through that game in like an hour and a half. That 3-hour game, I can get through it in half the time. And it makes me think, why haven't I watched sports this way my entire life?
Because that's why I watch highlights. I can get through the game 15 minutes, which is so much faster.
Yeah. And you lose a little bit because of that too, because you were talking about the anxiety and the suspense, like early on in this conversation, right? Like it was too much for you. Like you kind of lose that anxiety. You kind of lose that suspense. Like when they go on break and you don't know if your team's going to win for another 10 minutes, you can fast forward through it and get through it like in 3. You know what I mean? Yes, we made the field goal. Game's over. I'm out of here. You know what I mean?
Exactly right. It's just so much more straightforward, But I get though that some people would say, well, the suspension helps make the moment greater. But at the same time, though, like all I feel when Justin Tucker makes a 65-yard field goal is that my heart's beating out of my chest. I'm just like, no, it's too much. It's too much.
Back before I was banned from Reddit, and you probably haven't heard this yet, I got banned from Reddit like completely, which was completely my inspiration for both podcasts. So I don't have that inspiration anymore, but I'll be okay. I'll figure it out. But anyways, I was reading the comments from this one guy who basically was like talking about how he was struggling for gratification in life. And in this search for fulfillment that he had, he said, I've tried everything. I've tried video games, I've tried Netflix, I've tried new shows, I've tried old shows. And he said, none of those things that he was ever trying were actually working to make his life more meaningful. But I looked at his examples and they were all talking about consuming entertainment.
Right.
Nothing that he was doing added to the world. Everything that he was doing was relying on somebody else in order to make his life better, hoping that he would find the thing that he would connect with, the form of entertainment that he had nothing to do with. And I'm like, dude, have you tried creating something yourself? I don't think it's healthy to consume more than you create. I mean,
I think it's fair, but that's so hard. I think we're at that point, though, where consumption is so embedded within the societal structure that it's almost impossible to have more output than input. But I think, at the very least, though, I think we need to increase that output so that way it's healthier. I know that for me, because I've been doing a lot of things. Like recently, I had the most torturous experience translating this article that I found that was written in Japanese. It's never been translated in English before, so it was me and only me. I had to translate it. Just a little bit of a spoiler warning for people listening in. Fred does not know a lick of Japanese. I know konnichiwa, konbanwa, and yamate. That's all I got. And I butchered those.
So what, you just had to go and Google every word?
Yeah, but then, however, Google's not so great at making the precise translations of kanji. So your boy had to kind of look up a couple things, and I spent hours and way too much time. It was unhealthy. I was staring at those kanji for hours at a time, like, what do you mean? Speak to me. It was having that moment where it's like, Rose, bud. I just couldn't. It was so difficult. But by the end of it, when I had this project that was finished and I was able to give it into the boss man, it was a moment of utter jubilation because one, I'd done something that no one else had done before, which is translate this exact article, which I learned to translate the article that I worked on for hours and hours would have been like a $600, $700 price for a translator to go through it. And I go, I might have worked more than that to get to this point. But at the
Mm.
same time, though, I'm no professional translator. So if the professional translator is having trouble, then I must feel good because I was fighting tooth and nail to figure it out. And I got a decent translation. It actually makes a lick of sense. I'm like, wow, I did something pretty cool. It's not perfect, but that creation of doing something unique did give me that thrill for a whole couple days. I was like, oh, look at me.
But I think it's times when you do accomplish something great in your own personal life that took a lot of effort, that's when you deserve to be entertained.
Oh, and for sure. It's a balance, right? You have to
Right,
balance
right.
between the two.
I feel the same way about video games. I remember when I was young, I had this girlfriend who knew that she could get me to come into her house if she bought a video game console, right? Console, whatever that word is. Anyways, she bought Major League Baseball, and I played an entire season of MLB baseball on this video game, right? How many games is a season of baseball? Like 160 or something like that?
160 or just around.
162, I think. I
Mm-hmm.
played 162 games of video games, in which they probably lasted about an hour of each, which,
It's a lot. It's a lot of time. Yeah.
yeah. And I remember getting to the end and realizing how ungratifying it was. It's like, now what do I do? Do I just start a new season? I won, because I was playing on easy mode. I won, but what am I
Right.
supposed to do going forward? Do I play another season? And that was kind of the breaking point for me with entertainment. And this is when I was pretty young, probably like early 20s, right? And I'm like, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Hmm.
I'm not going to be entertained all the time.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in college, I'd fall asleep and my roommates would be playing video games when I went to sleep. And then I'd wake up 8 hours later and I'd look over at them and I'd see them still playing the video game 8 hours later when I woke up.
And you just wonder, like, man, like, I know they probably went to sleep and then woke up earlier, but at the same time, you go, oh, can't you do this something a little bit different? Just spice up the day with something different to start it off, you know?
But what do you think we get out of consuming sports? What's the appeal?
Huh. That's a great question. I think that the appeal comes from the fact that we can live a fantasy of something that we could not accomplish ourselves, which is to be this kind of athletic person who is able to be the gladiator, to be the popular star that's going through the stadium and wows people in the crowd. I think it's a similar sensation to people who become obsessed with singers, rappers, and artists, right? This kind of similar sensation, except these performers are not singing, but they are moving, they're fighting, they are jumping, they're doing things that for us is intrinsic entertainment. And it kind of goes back to some of the most basic forms of entertainment in the human experience, which is dancing, movement. This is stuff that's entertained humans for a long time. While we may have many complex entertainment styles, I think that we are still very simple creatures in that regard. Like when something jumps, we go, ooh, ooh, ah, me like.
So let me ask you this. Do you envy people? Like, do you envy people who have talents that you don't?
I think it's human to envy that, but I think where it's unhealthy is when it becomes an obsession and then you try to compete. I think we all recognize that we have our own special slots and abilities and things that allow us to perform at our best. I know that, for example, I'm a pretty athletic person for someone my size, but at the same time, there are plenty of other players, frisbee players, that are faster than me, stronger than me. But at the same time, I know my role in the field, but at the same time, if I don't have a great game, and sometimes that really can affect me a little bit, but I think about it and I go, but I still have at least my mind. And because I have this combination of skill sets that just make me unique, it allows me to just feel better about when someone's a little bit better at something than me in X. I know that, well, at least I have this little talent in Y that someone may just not be as familiar with. And it allows me to, at the very least, recognize that I am unique because of how I intersect all those different things into one little place and allows for me to offer my own contributions to the world in its own unique way. Yeah, I have a unique way of seeing the world.
So something I've been thinking about a lot recently is why is any of this appealing? And I guess the obvious answer is money and power, right?
That's a good one. Yeah, money and power is pretty good.
I feel like money and power are two completely different things.
Well, yes, they are very two different terms by the
but
definition.
but but they kind of come together as a package, right?
Sure, I think yeah, they're often associated with one another. Yeah.
I've been in positions where other people considered them power, and I didn't like it. I didn't. I don't want to be in charge of people. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I hate people. Sometimes I think people are idiots, so I don't want to be in charge of them. You know what I mean? But money's a completely different thing. Like money is this math problem, right? And
Hmm.
power is this emotional struggle,
Hmm.
right? Does that make sense to you?
I think it does. Yeah.
Like, do you want to be in charge of people?
Well, I kind of already am, but
What's the appeal?
I think that the appeal for me when I was more in charge of, well, not in charge, I was supervising, helping people, right?
Right,
Guiding
right.
them.
Yeah, you were.
And when you're guiding someone, I think that is a different feeling. It's a different feeling than managing people or just, be supervising people. When it's managing or supervising, now you have to worry about someone else behind your back and kind of going, hey, where are those performance reports? You kind of go, shoot, I have to put the pressure on the people that I'm working with, right? In order to kind of produce the results that keep my job. But in a situation where you're just a mentor and this is about them improving themselves, then that's a different feeling because you are still leading people. But the difference is this is for their own opportunity for growth. So if you feel like that the person kind of falls to the wayside, you go, well, I can try different things to improve next time, but that's their choice. But when that moment of when someone really grows and blossoms into a stronger individual because of what you do, it's a great moment. So I think that it's one of those things where in a lot of companies, we do not give people the position or the opportunity to really blossom into leaders. We give them the opportunity to basically just, kind of implement the company policy and just be harsh upholders of the rules, which means that people resent that person who's trying to just do their job. And it's complicated, but I think that in the end, we've definitely got this weird perception, at least in the working world, about how leadership works. And this has been a problem that leadership studies is trying to cover for time and memoriam, and it's still not been solved. But something that I think if we are able to kind of allow for some more leeway, then I think it would create healthier environments and I think would allow people to kind of deviate from this kind of unhealthy association of, how power works in different companies. Does that all make sense?
It does, but it all comes back to like, do we want to follow or do we want to live in our own within our own existence, right? Do we want to be autonomous? Is that the right word? Do
Thomas,
we,
yeah.
do we want to be our own powerful person or do we want to follow others, right?
Well, I think it depends on the nuance. Some people really do want to be more, they want that decision to be in front of them, where it's just that I'll help that person make that decision, but I'm not the one to make it, right? So they're more in the supplementary role or complementary role. Whereas someone else might go, I lose purpose if I'm not the one leading the charge or crafting my own destiny. And I think that comes down to nuance and it comes down to perspective and story and, someone's life and their life experiences. It all goes back to how the inner chemicals interact with your mind.
I think we could go in a different direction and this would be a completely different subject. So let's save it for another day.
Yeah.
Let's go back to sports. What if your star quarterback gets injured 4 plays into the season?
That's a good question.
And you had all this hope for your team. And you bought season tickets to watch the New York Jets. I had Aaron Rodgers as my fantasy football quarterback that weekend, and I was playing against you.
That's right.
And it was the nervous. Last. And I was like, okay, Aaron Rodgers, I need a good game out of you so that I can beat Fred playing fantasy football. And then 4 plays into the game, Aaron Rodgers was gone for the season.
I have to admit, I remember I didn't pay attention to the game. I was doing
Yeah,
other,
I wasn't watching in real
but
time
I
either.
saw a YouTube short of Aaron Rodgers being injured, and I my immediate reaction was both, "Oh no," and "Oh my goodness, I won." I thought I was not going to win. And of course, my first instinct was, oh, the poor guy. Like, this is something that you don't never want to see. And it looked horrible. I was like, well, that looks like a torn something. And turns out it was an Achilles, which is like the worst injury to get. But it was this moment of if you lose your quarterback that early in, that is instant dread because you've put so much into that season, particularly if you're a sports fan who suffered for a long time and you put so much value into the entertainment of that team entertaining you, that now they actually can be legitimately good. That's a different type of entertainment. And you feel this great sense of expectation. And when that expectation gets crushed by the kind of the unfortunate reality of the human anatomy, it really just, it's soul crushing. And people just get angry, they get despondent. You look at Jets fans and they are just kind of resigned to their fate of this is a snake bitten franchise. And you sit there and you go, it's a reminder of should you really been had your hopes that high? You could have just said, hey, let's hope Aaron Rodgers has a great season. Win or lose, though, this is still my team. This is still a team I have an attachment to.
But should we watch games that we know are going to be bad?
Sure,
Like,
why not?
okay, I have one of the worst teams in the league. I'm a fan of the Broncos, who is like literally one of the worst teams in the league. They got beat by 50 points the other day, right? Should I follow that? I just moved to Denver Broncos country, so I can watch them every week if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
But should I?
Well, I think it's about the fact that it helps create a local attachment to the community. That's why sports are so complicated.
Right.
It's not just the watching, it's the community that comes with it. And a lot of people do create a tighter knit community by just connecting to sports. Sports are such an easy conversation starter. Oh, you're a
Right.
Ravens fan or you're this fan. I am too. And all of a sudden you just start to develop a camaraderie with someone just on the fact that you talk about sports. Now that might be more of a male to male relationship type of thing, which you scrutinize that how you will. But I think it's something that I think it's something that's kind of a major value of sports. It's not just the individual watching; it's the community that can come together. But because often people watch from a TV, you lose that community, so then it becomes more obsessive and becomes more unhealthy.
Like, but it does help. Like, if you don't have anything to talk about with anybody, if you meet a new person, you can say, hey, how about those Buckeyes? You know what I mean? How about those Broncos? How about the Ravens? And then suddenly you have this thing to talk about that you would have had no other way. Like, there's this sense of community within sports,
Yeah.
and no matter how far apart your lives are, like you could maybe some dude who lives in a upper white middle class neighborhood or and somebody who lives in the ghetto, they both watch the Broncos game. You know what I mean?
Right.
And they can relate to that and they can talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing.
Oh no, it's just that you gotta be tortured for a little bit when the Dolphins hang seven.
Dude, that game was so fun to watch. I don't care which team I was rooting for. That was unlike anything else I've ever seen in my entire life. It was so fun to watch. There became this point. I was watching the Broncos Miami game and I was like, oh man, my team's getting their ass kicked. And my team's been getting their ass kicked for the last 5 years. So it's nothing new. But at some point in this game, it went from watching my team being miserable to, oh, wow, I'm watching history. You know what I mean? And I just wanted to get beat worse and worse and worse because I want to see this team make history. You know what I mean? Because it was so wild to watch. It was unreal. It was like surrealistic. I was like, how's this happening? Keep going. You know what I mean?
I had such a different interpretation for that. I remember still with visceral pain when Peyton Manning and the Baltimore Ravens, the 2013 season opener. This is Peyton Manning's revenge tour for the fact that the Ravens beat Peyton Manning in an epic game in the previous playoff series. And Peyton Manning dropped 7 touchdowns. That's an historic moment, and I felt nothing but pain and misery. This is before I kind of figured out how to better handle sports. But it was just one of those moments where I didn't want to see history. I'm like, screw this. I don't.
Right.
It's so different.
Yeah. All right. Well, mine was a regular season game where we were already 0-2, right? So it didn't really matter that
I
much.
mean, to be fair, the Ravens only wound up 0-1 after that game, so
Oh
it
yeah.
was a regular season game too. But it was still one of those moments like I don't want to see Peyton Manning throw 7 touchdowns. I don't like
The
that.
funny part is I went to watch it was supposed to be September 11th, the actual September 11th, right? I was
Mhm.
supposed to go watch the Broncos versus the Colts, and it got delayed because of obvious reasons, right?
Right.
So I had to go watch it at the end of the year. And by that time, both teams were supposed to be great. They were both horrible. And I went to the game in Indianapolis and I watched the Broncos versus the Colts. And Peyton Manning was this new quarterback for the Colts. And I'm like, who is this guy? I hate him. And he beat us, and I couldn't stand the guy. So it was really weird for him to become our quarterback, like, maybe like 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, that must have been an odd experience. I just know that the pain of seeing Peyton Manning beat the Baltimore team before in the playoffs years ago, and to see him in the Broncos uniform, like, oh no, same quarterback, same pain.
Wait,
But
who did he beat with? He with the Colts, right?
yeah, with the Colts that first time,
Yeah,
2006, I still
yeah.
remember that game. Like, oh, we could have won. Little 10-year-old me was not happy.
All right, back to the philosophy of it. What's the red flag that you've been consuming too much content? What's that red flag?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think the addiction comes in many different forms.
Yeah,
I think over emotional response to when things go wrong in the sports scenario, right?
yeah,
Someone gets angry, they punch a TV. Now that can just be someone who just couldn't regulate their emotions, but
right.
I think it's a telltale sign that something's gone wrong here. Something's gone a little bit too far into the deep. So I think that's kind of the most telling sign. And you see all the time with, where maybe a partner takes out their phone, they see that their partner's overly emotional to this loss that happens, or even a victory where someone just goes crazy and you just go, okay, you're not the one who's out there performing. You're not the one getting the contract. Like it ain't that deep.
Right. But it's different when your team wins than when it loses, right? It's like if you can share the happiness of your team winning the Super Bowl,
Oh yeah,
it's mostly good for you, right?
sure, yeah.
But if you sulk in the fact that your team lost 16 games in a season, 17 games in a season, that's not fun. And that's not good for anybody. That's not mentally healthy for anybody, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I just know if the season gets bad, which for the Baltimore team is quite rare. But I know when the last bad season we had, I was like, I just won't really pay attention. If they win, great. If they lose, oh, so what? Oh, be it. You know, I think. But if someone keeps going back, I'm like, ooh, you're a masochist. Don't think.
So what do you think of the saying, if you don't root for your team when they're not good, you're not a real fan?
Well, you can root for your team in different ways. You just don't have to watch them and suffer. You can kind of just go. You could say, "I wish them the best."
Yeah.
I'm not gonna put myself through that. There's people who say that. I think that those are season ticket holders who are trying to excuse the money hole that they're in. So it's one
Yeah.
of those things that you kind of just go. It's not really the adult response, is it? It's really the I feel guilty because I spent money on something that's not meeting my expectations.
As somebody who has a lot going on in your life, um, how do you manage your time well?
I think that when it comes to like the whole managing time, I think it really just depends on you have to prioritize things like that. That's why it's only 2 to 3 hours a week of sports. And even then I can reduce that even more.
Yeah.
Uh, it's one of those situations where you need to prioritize what needs to just be done and what fulfillment can I get out of getting something done. Did I like the idea? Did I enjoy translating 25 odd pages of academic Japanese? No. I was banging my head on the wall. I was literally losing my marbles. I was talking to myself like a madman. Not really great. But
Yeah, I
in
get
that moment, though, I knew that I had to get this done. But when you get to that end and you get past that molehill, you say, it was kind of torturous, but it was worth it. It's much more fulfilling than watching a game and you see them lose and you have to dwell on. You go, I've done nothing, only to be upset. What am I doing?
So, do you find personal successes like more gratifying than consuming somebody else's success? Like,
Oh yes, for
yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
However, the Super Bowl is pretty good. That's a pretty good. That's close, but it's
Yeah.
nothing like when you got personal accomplishment and you pull something off. Like I've been doing a lot of hunting for articles for my work, and we're creating a database. And I was able to find a dissertation that is 80 years old, and
Mm.
this thing is hard to find. It is almost impossible to find it because it's also this dissertation is really important. It's one of these like foundational pieces for this little psychological assessment, and that's not even the right word. Psychological tool that I'm creating this database for, and it's like this is like where it all started. So no one's seen this thing in decades, and here I
Hmm.
am, and I'm looking at this thing faded, and I could barely read the words, but it was this incredible sensation of I am literally refinding history. And it's so minor, but it's just so cool.
So I have been listening to a lot of people talk about like similar things recently. And something that baffles me is what's the difference between Googling something and actually doing a deeper dive? Where's the jump off point between those two things? Like, where do you realize, okay, Google's not going to do this for me, so I have to go to this different place?
Well, the simple answer is, are you in academia or not? Because because most of the time I say Google does answer the question, but
You
when
think
you
it's getting worse? You think
uh,
Google used to answer the question and it doesn't anymore?
no, I think it answers the question sufficiently. The issue, I guess, for me is that it's become less useful because my research and my life's gotten so specific and so focused that I guess the point that I know Google's not going to get me what I'm looking for. So
Hmm.
then I have to go through the Library of Congress. I have to go through these different avenues of life in order to find these things. And I have to physically go through stuff in order to find what I'm looking for. Because sometimes the internet doesn't archive everything. And I'm afraid for all the Gen Zers and Gen Alphas out there, you'll learn one day that you still need to look at paper sometimes. Even when the trees get chopped up, the paper is still important.
I actually think that Google used to do a better job than they do now. Um, Something's changed, and I don't like it. But they only go towards politically correct answers, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I miss the old days when you could Google something and actually understand why people think the way that they do, but you can't get that anymore, and it frustrates me a lot. And we could dive deeper into that into a different in a different conversation.
But I think I definitely agree that it just feel like that. Just feel like that Google can sometimes be a little bit. It only tells you the surface level for sure.
Yeah,
If you if you
it's
get any deeper,
it's getting worse and worse and worse
yeah, like I can
as time goes on.
I could barely find books for my studies. You just go, the books don't even exist. They tell you that the book exists, but then it doesn't tell you where to get it. So then you go, okay, I have to do it myself, and then you gotta go through databases, and then you find it, and you go, I get why, but at the same time, it's also the fact that Google's trying to not touch the copyright, and I get it, but at the same time, it's like, come on, Google, like you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You should spend a little bit of money on trying to access and getting deeper answers for everything, since it's such a
Wait,
super user.
wait, do you think that's what it is? That they don't want to like step on other people's toes?
Oh yeah, because everyone gets so.
Really?
Oh, I think so. I think.
Like the lack of information on the internet is because Google doesn't want to like infringe on copyrights? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I think so. There are some very strict rules about, at least for like in the academic world, people go, well, I don't want my information to be access to the public. Like there's such a thing as privately published articles, and those articles are not meant to be distributed publicly. They're meant to be individually given to certain people. I'm trying to hunt down one of these things, and let me tell you, it's a nightmare. But it's one of those things where Google's never going to get it because then if that copyright is still hot and off the press, you'll get sued to. Let's just say you'll get sued to. I need to change my wording here. You'll get sued to. I can't find a good
We're
substitute.
trying to be clean.
Yeah, right. You'll get sued to heaven and back. How about that?
I'm
So,
surprised by that because I didn't realize that's what the why Google has failed so much. I didn't realize that aspect of it.
yeah, it's one.
But Google is failing horribly. because you used to be able to Google answers to things and you would get them and you can't anymore, which again is another conversation for another day, but it frustrates the hell out of me. Oh, did I just to heaven?
Oh my goodness. Oh.
All right. Well, I think we're running out of time, and this was a pretty great conversation. So let's just call it a day, right?
Yeah, sounds good. Well,
it was fun. I miss you, brother.
You miss you too. Miss you in person, but I can't obviously travel across the country.
Right. Yeah. We live so far away these days.
No, too far. But we still have the power of technology, and maybe one day maybe Google will be better, and that way we can do. But anyway, thanks to all the people who will be listening to this, and we will come out again shortly with another wonderful rambling conversation.
You were afraid that we were going to go short.
I know.
We never do.
We went over again.
Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com, TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic, or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.